Look, I am literally shaking right now just thinking about this. We all know Catherine has the patience of a saint, but seeing her break down in absolute tears at the gates, but why? The reason was Prince George. The family had just arrived at Kensington Palace for Princess Diana's secret memorial service. It was supposed to be completely silent, but George completely changed the game the second he walked up to that microphone. What that boy did completely froze Camilla, and honestly, Camilla's face went dead white. She was shocked, and you could just tell she never saw it coming. Palace staff are already whispering that it was the ultimate act of defiance, and of course the king is doing backflips trying to scrub the footage before it leaks online. Was it just a sweet tribute to his grandmother, or was George sending a very loud, very deliberate message straight to his step-grandmother? You need to stick around until the end of this because the palace is desperately trying to block this story from getting out. Let's be completely honest with ourselves for a second. None of this drama just happened by accident. If you've been following the palace timeline as closely as I have, you knew the tension was building for months leading up to this specific August morning. We need to talk about the absolute control Camilla tried to flex over this entire memorial service. Behind closed doors, she was allegedly the main force pushing for what the palace insiders called a streamlined, respectful silence. But let's call it what it really was, a calculated attempt to completely bury Princess Diana's legacy and keep the focus far away from the people's princess. According to sources inside the palace, Camilla pressured the palace scheduling teams and senior aides to enforce a total blackout. The blueprint she approved was insultingly brief. No public announcements, no cameras on the grass, absolutely no microphones, no formal speeches, and, most importantly, zero room for any emotional surprises. The plan she signed off on demanded that William, Catherine, and the kids walk in, stay precisely in their assigned spots, drop their white roses, and leave in total silence. It was designed to look like a chore, a quick box to check before moving on. She wanted it over in under 10 minutes so the media wouldn't have any dramatic photos to print the next morning. But what Camilla completely failed to realize is that you cannot manipulate the heart of a child, especially not Prince George. The real drama actually started the night before at Adelaide Cottage, completely out of Camilla's sight. Catherine was reportedly in the living room when George walked up to her with some incredibly heavy questions. He wanted to know if his father, Prince William, still missed Diana every single day, even though so many years had passed. Catherine, being the absolute class act she is, sat him down and explained that losing a mother is a type of grief that time never truly erases. She told him that families grow, life moves forward, but that empty space stays with a person forever. That was the exact moment George asked the question that changed everything. Would Grandma Diana have known us? Catherine told him that William firmly believes Diana watches over them and would have completely adored her grandchildren. George didn't say much after that, but later that evening, Catherine caught him sitting at his small desk, furiously writing something down on a piece of folded cream cardstock. She didn't read over his shoulder. She wanted to give her son his privacy, thinking he just wanted to leave a sweet, quiet letter under the flowers. She had absolutely no idea that George was planning a full-blown palace rebellion. When the morning arrived, the atmosphere was thick with anxiety. Catherine was under immense pressure. She knew George had that unapproved letter tucked inside his navy blazer, and she could see how tense he was during the drive to Kensington Palace. She was terrified of what would happen if the strict Camilla-approved rules were broken in front of the palace staff. The moment they stepped out of the car and walked toward the gates of the sunken garden, the trap was officially set. Camilla's hand-picked aides were already standing guard, holding their clipboards, ready to ensure that the children didn't step an inch out of line. But George kept pressing his hand against his chest, making sure that secret cream card was still right there in his pocket. Let's visualize exactly how the palace tried to set the stage for this absolute disaster. The sunken garden at Kensington Palace was completely locked down. No crowds, no massive media risers, and definitely no sympathetic faces in the background. It was just crisp gravel, perfectly manicured hedges, and that stunning bronze statue of Princess Diana staring back at them. But the atmosphere wasn't peaceful. It was completely suffocating. Camilla's hand-picked Kensington Palace aides were hovering like hawks, clutching their clipboards and checking their watches. They had a literal spreadsheet detailing how many seconds this visit was supposed to last. It was disgusting to watch. They treated a grandson's visit to his late grandmother like a tightly timed corporate PR stunt. The senior aide stepped forward immediately, whispering the final orders to the family as if they were soldiers preparing for a drill. Sequence was non-negotiable. Prince William would step up to the bronze statue first, place his single white rose, and step back. Catherine would follow exactly 2 paces behind him. Then, the children would be sent forward in a neat, symmetrical line. George on the left, Charlotte in the middle, and little Louis on the right. Each child had been handed one identical white rose. They were explicitly instructed to drop the flowers beneath the statue. Observe exactly 60 seconds of complete, unbroken silence. Turn around and walk straight back to the waiting vehicles. No lingering, no looking around, and absolutely no talking. William looked completely drained before the walk even started. You could see the heavy weight of the world on his shoulders. He has spent his entire life being measured against royal protocol, forced to mourn his mother in front of flashing cameras, and now he was being forced to mourn her under the strict, icy guidelines approved by Camilla's faction. He wanted this to be a pure family moment for his kids, a chance to connect with the grandmother they only know through old bedtime stories and faded photographs. But the palace machinery had completely stripped the soul out of the mourning. William looked over at Catherine, giving her a tense, reassuring nod, completely unaware that his oldest son was about to tear the palace rulebook to absolute shreds. Catherine was visibly struggling to maintain her trademark composure. Her eyes kept darting down to Prince George's navy blazer. Every few seconds, George would subtly press his forearm against his chest, feeling the stiff edges of that secret cream card hidden in his inner pocket. Catherine knew the card existed, but she had no idea what George had written on it, and she certainly didn't know he was planning a public declaration. Her hands were shaking slightly as she adjusted Princess Charlotte's coat. She was caught in an impossible position, trying to be a supportive mother to a boy who clearly wanted to honor his grandmother, while simultaneously feeling the immense pressure of Camilla's strict eyes watching through the reports of the aides. The cue was given, and the family began their slow march down the gravel path toward the statue. The silence in the garden was incredibly loud. The only sound was the crunching of gravel beneath their formal shoes. William stepped forward first, his face completely stone-faced as he laid his rose down. Catherine followed, her expression tight and anxious. Then, the kids took their cue. George walked with absolute purpose, his eyes locked onto the statue of Diana. He didn't look like a nervous kid. He looked like a young prince who knew exactly what he was about to do. He laid his white rose down right next to his father's, but instead of turning around and stepping back into the protocol line like the aides expected, George stood his ground. He didn't move an inch. The silence in that garden became completely deafening the exact second Prince George refused to step back. You could practically feel the collective panic rippling through the palace aides standing on the gravel path. One of Camilla's top henchmen immediately raised his clipboard, giving George a sharp, frantic hand gesture to return to his father's side. He thought George had just forgotten the sequence, but George completely ignored him. Instead, he reached slowly into the breast pocket of his navy blazer, wrapped his fingers around that unapproved cream card, and pulled it out. The moment that handwriting-covered card was exposed to the light, Catherine's breath completely hitched. She knew this was the exact boundary Camilla had drawn in the sand. No unauthorized items, no personal displays, and absolutely no breaking the script. William looked up sharply, his brow furrowing as he saw his 10-year-old son holding a folded piece of paper, turning away from the bronze statue to look directly at him. In that split second, the tightly controlled clinical memorial service Camilla had engineered completely evaporated. This wasn't a corporate photo op anymore. It was an active family intervention. And let's talk about the absolute seismic shockwave that hit Camilla's camp. Through the updates being fed directly to the main palace offices, the realization hit that the entire script had been flipped. Camilla's whole master plan was to keep this memorial cold, quick, and entirely transactional so Diana's ghost wouldn't overshadow her own standing in the weekly press cycle. She had specifically banned microphones and formal speeches to prevent William or Harry from making any emotional statements that could pull the public's heartstrings back toward the past. She thought by silencing the adults she had won. She never in a million years expected a child to smuggle a weapon of pure emotional truth past her security dragnet. George didn't look at the aides, and he didn't look at the cameras that weren't there. He looked straight at his father, his chest rising as he took a deep, steady breath. His voice, when it broke the silence of the sunken garden, was incredibly quiet but perfectly clear. He looked at the cream card and said, "Papa, can I read this first?" The question hung in the humid morning air like an absolute bomb. William didn't answer right away. He was caught entirely off guard, his eyes darting from the handwritten note to Catherine's incredibly pale face. He could see the sheer desperation in the aides' eyes as they hovered on the perimeter, practically itching to step onto the grass and physically pull the young prince back into the designated formation. The palace protocol dictates that if a moment is not on the official itinerary, it does not exist, and it must be stopped. But William, looking at the determination in his oldest son's eyes, made a split-second decision that must have made Camilla's blood run cold. He didn't correct his son. He didn't tell him to follow the rules they had spent all week rehearsing at Adelaide Cottage. Instead, William gave the slightest, most subtle nod of his head. George unfolded the card. The crisp paper made a sharp snapping sound in the stillness. He didn't use an official royal title. He didn't say Her Royal Highness. He opened his mouth and read the first words, Grandma Diana. With just 2 words, George completely erased Camilla's authority from the day, cementing Diana as the one and only maternal anchor of the Wales family line. The words that came out of Prince George's mouth next didn't just break protocol. They completely shattered the carefully constructed facade that the palace had been trying to maintain for years. George kept his eyes glued to that cream card, his voice steady as he read, Grandma Diana, I never got to meet you, but I know you because Papa talks about the things you taught him. Papa says you taught him that being kind matters more than being important. You could practically hear the jaws dropping among the staff standing on the perimeter. That single line was a direct, devastating contrast to the cold, rigid, status-obsessed protocol that Camilla had forced upon this entire morning. George was reducing his grandmother's entire massive legacy down to one pure, beautiful concept: kindness first. He didn't mention her global fame, her style, or her royal status. He brought her right into the modern day as a living influence on how he is being raised. But the real emotional execution, the ultimate slap that would leave Camilla absolutely reeling behind closed doors, came with the very next sentence. George stopped, lifted his eyes toward the bronze statue, and then turned his head to look directly at his father. He took a small breath and read, I wish you could see Papa with us because then you would know you raised him properly. Thank you for giving us our dad. The force of those words landed like an absolute sledgehammer. Prince William's face completely shifted. For a man who has spent his entire public life mastering an ironclad composure, there was absolutely nowhere useful to hide from a sentence like that. George wasn't thanking Diana for producing a future king or a royal heir. He was thanking her for producing a loving father. The titles completely disappeared from the garden. The succession, the duty, the palace politics, all of it was stripped away in a single second. William's eyes immediately filled with tears. His chin lowered, his shoulder dropped, and he had to lift a hand toward his mouth, desperately trying to steady his breathing as the tears started rolling down his face right in front of his children. Seeing William completely break down was the exact moment Catherine's composure totally collapsed. She had been holding her breath the entire time, trying to stand perfectly straight in her designated protocol position like a good soldier. But watching her husband openly sob beneath his mother's statue was a sight she could not withstand. The tears started pouring down her face. She stepped completely out of her assigned spot, abandoning the rigid formation, and rushed forward to rest a heavy, supportive hand against William's arm. She was weeping openly at the gates of the garden, completely helpless to stop the raw emotion from taking over. This was the absolute nightmare scenario for Camilla's faction. The line "you raised him properly" was a devastating, unspoken indictment of everything that happened after Diana passed away. It was a declaration to the entire room that William is the incredible man and father he is today solely because of the foundation Diana laid for him. completely erasing any maternal influence or credit Camilla ever hoped to claim in the history book. George had unknowingly answered the one painful question William had likely carried in his heart for decades. Would my mother be proud of the father I became? George didn't just answer it. He validated it in front of the entire palace apparatus, leaving the staff completely frozen, unable to stop the emotional mutiny unfolding right before their eyes. What happened next was a complete, unmitigated disaster for the palace handlers. The moment Prince William turned his face away, sobbing into his hand, the rigid royal formation didn't just bend, it completely dissolved. Princess Charlotte was the first to react. She had been standing exactly where she was told to stand, looking like a perfect little doll for the cameras that weren't supposed to be there. But the second she saw her father break down, she realized the palace rules were entirely meaningless. She completely abandoned Catherine's side, stepped right off the designated path, and walked straight over to stand beside George beneath the bronze statue. No aide dared to move. No handler stepped forward to stop her. Charlotte reached her brother, stood shoulder to shoulder with him in absolute solidarity, and placed her hand lightly against his arm. She was protecting him. Little Prince Louis watched his older siblings, completely wide-eyed. He took a hesitant step forward, feeling the tension in the air. Catherine instinctively reached her hand out toward him, as if her royal training was telling her to bring him back into line, but she stopped herself. She lowered her hand and let him go. Louis crossed the remaining distance on the gravel and joined George and Charlotte right at the base of Diana's statue. Look at the imagery of this moment. 3 grandchildren, standing hand in hand beneath a grandmother they had never met in this life, completely ignoring the strict timelines and boundaries Camilla had spent weeks setting up. They created their own formation, one built on pure, unforced family love, not clinical palace scripting. William looked at his 3 children standing together under Diana's shadow, and the emotion just deepened. Every single piece of the carefully prepared, Camilla-approved sequence had completely vanished, and not a single soul in that garden tried to restore it. But behind the palace walls, oh, the reaction was pure, unadulterated fury. When the live reports from the aides started flooding back to the main offices, detailing how George had read an unapproved letter, how William was crying on camera, and how the kids had completely broken formation, Camilla was reportedly absolutely seething. This was the ultimate public humiliation for her faction. She had designed this entire morning to prove that she was the one pulling the strings, that Diana's memory could be neatly managed, categorized, and phased out of the modern royal brand. Instead, a 10-year-old boy had completely outmaneuvered her, showing the entire world that Diana is still the true, undisputed heartbeat of the Wales family line. Insiders claim Camilla immediately began demanding that the cream card be confiscated by staff the second the family left the garden. She wanted that handwritten note secured, locked away, and completely destroyed before a single syllable of its contents could be leaked to the press or independent royal watchers. She knew that if George's words ever went viral, it would completely destroy years of careful PR work meant to cement her own position as the matriarch of the family. She was allegedly barking orders to senior palace communications handlers, demanding a total media blackout on the entire morning. But the gears were already turning, and the king was already in a full-blown panic trying to contain the absolute emotional mutiny that had just occurred right under their noses. Let me tell you, the palace went into an absolute frantic lockdown the second that car door clicked shut. The king was reportedly frantic, burning up the secure lines to the communications team, demanding to know if any staff member had a phone out or if any rogue gardeners had recorded audio of George at the microphone. Camilla's faction was allegedly pushing for a complete media wipe. They wanted the official palace statement to say it was a quiet, brief, uneventful visit that strictly followed protocol. They were desperate to paint it as just another routine royal obligation. But you cannot erase the truth when it happens in front of witnesses, and the palace staff knew exactly what they had just seen. They had seen a complete shift in power, executed flawlessly by a child. But the most beautiful, heartbreaking part of this entire saga happened later that evening, completely away from the palace chaos. At approximately 6:20 p.m., long after the official family visit had ended, after the aides had gone home and the courtyard had cleared out, Prince William did something that proved exactly whose son he is. He quietly slipped out of the main residence and returned to the sunken garden completely alone. The sun was going down, The palace was dead quiet, and there were no handlers around to check his posture or time his movements. He walked up to the statue not as a future king, not as a public figure, but purely as Diana's boy. He bent down, reached beneath the white rose George had left, and picked up that cream card with his son's uneven, careful handwriting. Standing there in the twilight, William read those words all over again in total silence. And as he looked up at the bronze statue of his mother, with nobody watching, he whispered just a few words. "You would have loved them, Mom." He didn't take the card with him to be locked in some private palace safe. He tucked it right back beneath the white rose, letting it stay in the dirt of the garden where it belonged, protected by his mother's shadow forever. This morning started with a cold, calculated plan to bury a legacy, but it ended with the ultimate proof that Diana's heart is alive and well in the next generation. Camilla can try to rewrite history all she wants, but she will never be Grandma Diana to those kids. George made that crystal clear. So, I want to hear from you right now. If you believe Prince George showed the absolute courage and heart that Princess Diana would be incredibly proud of, I need you to flood the comment section below. Type "Diana would be proud of George" right now so we can completely fill this page with a united message of support for the Wales family. Do not just watch this in silence. Hit that like button for George. Share this video with every single person who still carries the people's princess in their heart. And make sure you hit subscribe to Palace Beacon right now before the palace handlers try to get this channel blocked. Stick around, because in our next video we are diving deep into the secret letters Charles Spencer just uncovered that prove the palace timing was no coincidence.